Evan Wheeler lifted the hood of his old pickup and wiped his oil-stained hands on a worn rag. He had been feeling a little nervous this morning. The foreman had promised to stop by the garage that afternoon with an important announcement. Evan had a hunch about what it would be about, and his heart was racing and then jumping. Over the past 13 years at a Louisville auto shop, he had worked his way up from apprentice to seasoned mechanic, and now his life was about to take another turn. "Hey, Evan," a voice said behind him. He straightened up and turned around. Jake, his partner and friend, stood next to him. A young man, about 5 years younger than Evan, with a reckless grin. Jake held a mug of coffee in his hands, a wisp of steam rising in the stuffy air of the workshop. "The boss is looking for you," Jake nodded toward the office. "Looks like it's time." Evan felt his insides tighten with anticipation. He dropped the rag on the table and headed toward the office. He tried to stop his fingers from shaking as he walked. His wife's face flashed through his mind. Lindsay would smile when she heard the news. He had promised her that he would rise up the ranks someday, and that day seemed to have arrived. The small office smelled of coffee and papers. The boss, Mr. Rogers, was sitting at his desk, looking over some invoices. He looked up over his glasses when he saw Evan. "Ah, there you are," he said calmly. "Come in, sit down." Evan sank into the chair opposite, his knees shaking slightly, and he clasped his hands to hide his nervousness. "We've been thinking," Rogers began. "Well, you know, you're one of our most valuable employees. 13 years with us, no complaints, customers love you." "Thank you, sir," Evan said quietly. Rogers pushed the papers aside and folded his hands on the table. "We have a vacancy for a senior mechanic, a shift supervisor. And I can't think of a better candidate than you, Evan. If you don't mind, you'll start in your new position tomorrow." For a moment, Evan thought he had misheard. He blinked, and then a happy smile spread across his face. "Of course, I don't mind," he blurted out and stood up, holding out his hand. "Thank you very much, sir." Mr. Rogers also stood up and shook his hand firmly. "You deserve it. We'll review your salary too and discuss the details later. Now you can take a break, catch your breath." Evan walked out of the office, trying to walk calmly, but inside he was jubilant. Jake was waiting by the lift, and seeing his friend's smile, he grinned. "Well, did they promote you?" Evan nodded, still not believing his luck. "Chief mechanic. Can you imagine?" He clapped his friend on the shoulder. "We'll celebrate tonight." "Knew it would be like this," Jake chuckled. "Congratulations, kid. You really deserve it." The rest of the workday passed in a blur. Evan fixed minor problems for customers, checked fluid levels, but his mind kept returning to one thing. He wanted to tell Lindsay. He and his wife had been through a lot. There had been times when money was tight, when he had to work late at the garage for overtime. Lindsay would wait patiently at home for him, heating up dinner. Her support meant everything to him. Before the end of his shift, Evan called his wife. "Hello, Lynn. How is your day?" "Hi, I'm fine." Lindsay's voice sounded distracted. There was background noise on the line, as if she was outside or in a public place. "I have great news. I want to tell you in person. Let's go somewhere tonight. Let's celebrate," Evan suggested, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "News?" she asked, a little wary. "Evan, I have a lot to do today. I was planning to stop by my mom's after work. Maybe tomorrow?" Well, he bit his lip, trying to hide the sting of disappointment. He wanted so much to share the joy immediately. "Okay, sure. Tomorrow, so tomorrow." "Thank you, darling. Congratulations in advance. Whatever it is," her voice smiled. "We'll talk at home tonight, okay?" "Of course. I love you." "And I love you," Lindsay replied and hung up. Evan put the phone down and stood for a moment in the middle of the garage, looking somewhere through the metal tool racks. He felt a little annoyed. He had been waiting for this promotion for so many years, and on such a day his wife couldn't get away to celebrate with him. On the other hand, she could have important things to do. Maybe her mother really needed help. Lindsay was a caring daughter, visiting her parents regularly. Evan respected that and didn't want to be selfish. Having finished his last chores, he changed his clothes and washed his hands. Jake caught up with him on the way out. Well, congratulations again. I was thinking maybe a beer after work. Thanks, buddy, but let's do it later, okay? Evan shook his friend's hand. I want to go home today. I'm a little tired. He was actually looking forward to seeing Lindsay and telling her everything in person. He figured that if she stayed with her mother for a little while, it would be okay, she could wait, but then they could celebrate together. He walked out to the parking lot, climbed into his old green Ford pickup, and started the engine. The afternoon sun was setting, painting the Louisville sky a golden-orange color. Evan closed his eyes for a moment and smiled to himself. It was all starting to fall into place. A job he loved, a promotion, new opportunities ahead. He even wondered if he could now start saving for that river house he and Lindsay had dreamed of. When he pulled up to his low, one-story house in a quiet neighborhood, it was already getting dark outside. The house greeted him with darkness. It looked like Lindsay hadn't returned from her parents yet. Evan turned on the lights in the living room and kitchen. He put the kettle on the stove, trying to pass the time. His stomach was growling from hunger, but he didn't want to eat without his wife. He walked around the neat living room, a soft sofa, family photos on a shelf. There was him and Lindsay a couple of years ago on the banks of the Ohio River, both laughing, the wind blowing through her blonde hair. And next to that, a younger picture of Evan in overalls by the garage, hugging Lindsay, oil staining her cheek, and she making a playful face. The memories were warm. The kettle boiled, and Evan made himself some strong tea, deciding to have a sandwich for a snack. Time dragged on. Finally, around 9 o'clock, he heard a car pull up. Evan looked out the window. Lindsay got out of her mother's silver sedan and headed toward the house. He noticed that his wife was holding a bag and looked tired. The door opened and Lindsay walked in, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Hello. Sorry I'm late." "It's okay," Evan hurried to her, helping her take off her coat. He had missed her so much during the day. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, Mom just asked me to help with replanting the flowers and some other little things." Lindsay spoke a little absent-mindedly, walking into the kitchen. "Have you had dinner?" "I was waiting for you," he answered softly, following her. Lindsay opened the refrigerator and took out a pot of soup she had cooked the day before. "I'll warm it up. You're probably hungry." Evan stopped in front of her, crossing his arms over his chest and not taking his eyes off her. Inside, the excitement was flaring up again. Now he was going to tell her, "You know." He began, unable to contain himself. "Remember how I said that we were planning some changes at work today?" Lindsay turned at the sound of his voice, ladle in hand. "Yes, what's going on today?" "I got promoted, Lynn," Evan announced triumphantly, unable to hold back a smile. "I'm now the senior mechanic, the shift supervisor. Can you imagine?" He waited for his wife to throw up her hands in joy, or at least smile broadly. But Lindsay merely nodded, a forced smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I see. Congratulations." And she turned back to the stove, stirring the soup. Evan was taken aback. He thought she would throw herself on his neck. After all, they had discussed the possibility of a promotion so much. He stepped closer. "That's great, right? The salary will be higher, so we can start saving for our plans." "Yeah, I'm glad, Evan, I really am," she said, but her voice was tired. "It's just that my head is splitting. Can we talk about it tomorrow? I'm really happy for you, honestly." She turned off the stove and poured the reheated soup into bowls. Evan stood there, feeling the joy inside him crumple like a balloon being let out of air. He exhaled quietly and forced a smile. "Of course, honey. Let's eat." They sat down at the small kitchen table. Lindsay ate in silence, staring at her plate. Evan occasionally glanced at her, trying to figure out what was wrong. Was she just having a bad day, or had she had a fight with her mother? Lindsay did look tired. There were light shadows under her eyes. Her hair was a little disheveled, although she was usually always neat. After dinner, Lindsay went straight to the shower, saying she wanted to go to bed. Evan helped clear the table, trying not to think about the unpleasant feeling in his soul. He had accepted congratulations from his colleagues, was full of enthusiasm, and at home such a cool congratulations. But maybe she was just tired. He decided not to wind himself up. When Lindsay came out of the bathroom, already in her pajamas, he hugged her and kissed her temple. "Is everything okay, darling?" "Yeah, just a headache," she answered quietly and went to bed. "Sorry, I'm in a bad mood. I'm really happy for you. We'll talk tomorrow, okay?" "Of course," he whispered, covering her with a blanket. "Rest." Lindsay turned to the wall almost immediately. Evan lay down next to her, looking at the ceiling in the semi-darkness. The joyful day had ended on a strange note. He hoped that tomorrow would be better. They would discuss plans, celebrate. Maybe they could go to their favorite restaurant on the weekend. Before going to bed, he gently touched his wife's hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't respond to the gesture either. He wasn't sure if she was asleep. Evan closed his eyes, convincing himself that his wife's fatigue and migraine were the only reason for her restraint. The next day, Evan woke up early, as usual. In the grayish pre-dawn twilight, the bedroom seemed alien and lifeless. Lindsay was breathing quietly next to him, her back turned to him. Evan lay for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling. The memories of the previous evening left a bitter aftertaste. He still couldn't understand why his wife hadn't shared his joy. He rose quietly, trying not to wake Lindsay, and went into the kitchen to make coffee. Dawn was breaking, the sun peeking through the window, casting a soft glow into the small kitchen. Evan took out 2 mugs and poured coffee. As the drip coffee maker hummed, filling the kitchen with its aroma, he thought. Maybe I should have insisted and dragged her out to the restaurant, he thought. But she did look exhausted. Lindsay had been working a lot lately. She had gotten a job as a receptionist at a spa downtown a year ago, and at first she had liked it. But lately she had been complaining about her boss and her moody clients. Perhaps the problems at work were draining her energy. After pouring coffee into mugs, he returned to the bedroom. Lindsay was already sitting on the edge of the bed, pulling on her robe. "Good morning," Evan smiled, handing her a mug. "Hi." She took the coffee and took a small sip. Thanks." He sat down next to her, trying to catch her eye. "How's your head?" "Better." "Huh." She looked at him absent-mindedly. "Yes, it seems better. Sorry about yesterday." "It's okay, everything's fine," he hastened to assure her. "The main thing for me is that you're here. We'll still have time to celebrate, maybe tonight." Lindsay looked down at her mug, avoiding answering. "Today, I promised Caitlin that we'd go to yoga together after work. Remember Caitlin? We went to college together." Evan nodded, though the name meant little to him. Lindsay seemed to have mentioned this friend a couple of times. "Well, maybe after yoga, or on the weekend." Lindsay smiled weakly. "Let's do it on the weekend. I just have a busy schedule the week ahead work, and my mom and my friend. I don't want to do you a favor in a hurry." The word favor stung him. He hadn't expected that turn of phrase. "Lindsay, you're not doing me a favor. This is our common holiday. You've supported me so much." "Yes, I did," she interrupted unexpectedly and immediately removed the irritation from her face, sighing. "Sorry, that's not what I meant. Of course, I want to celebrate. Let's just pick a day when neither of us has anything to do. Okay?" Evan felt awkward. He didn't want to push. "Okay, sorry for pushing." He stood up and took a few sips of coffee, feeling the bitterness on his tongue echoing his mood. Lindsay went into the bathroom to get ready. Half an hour later, she was running out of the bedroom in business attire, a light blouse, a pencil skirt. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup was flawless, and there was no trace of yesterday's fatigue. Evan met her at the door. "You look beautiful. Do you need a ride?" "No, no." Lindsay waved her hand, pulling on her coat. "I'm going the other way. You'll be late for work. I have my own car, and there's no traffic this morning." She seemed to avoid his offer, although they usually rode together to the city center sometimes, but even did not insist. "Okay then, have a nice day." Lindsay paused for a second and looked into his eyes. You too, Evan. See you tonight. He touched her shoulder gently. Love you. Lindsay smiled, but her eyes remained tired, or rather distant. And you, she said quietly and left the house. The door slammed shut. Evan stood in the empty living room, listening to her car start outside. Something was definitely wrong. He knew it in his gut, even though he didn't want to admit it. Just stress, just tired, he told himself as he pulled on his work jacket. His new position came with responsibilities. He couldn't be late. It was an unusually busy day at the shop. Evan was now responsible not only for his own job, but for the entire shift, checking on the other mechanics, handling parts deliveries, consulting with customers. It was distracting, but every now and then he found himself thinking about Lindsay. Why was she so cold? He remembered how, a few months ago, the two of them had dreamed about how everything would change for the better if he got a promotion. She had joked that the first check she got would go toward a spa vacation for her. Now that it was a reality, she was unenthusiastic. Closer to midday, a regular customer, an old man named Frank, dropped by the shop with his always troubled Toyota. While Evan was changing his oil, Frank got chatting. I heard you got promoted, kid. Congratulations, he said in a raspy voice, sitting on a bench near the garage. Thanks, Frank, Evan smiled, lying under the car. News travels fast. Jake's been chattering non-stop. The old man chuckled, then coughed. Decided to celebrate. Evan climbed out from under the car, wiping his hands. Well, it hasn't worked out yet. Maybe on the weekend. Well, Frank narrowed his eyes. Your wife is happy, I suppose. Evan froze for a moment, then forced a smile. Of course I'm happy, he lied, turning away from the hood. Frank seemed to detect the uncertainty in his voice. Women can be strange sometimes. My late Edna used to sulk for a week for no apparent reason. Don't worry about it. Evan just nodded, not wanting to discuss personal matters. He quickly finished the oil and handed the keys to the Toyota back to old Frank. Done. Try not to drive too fast, okay? Where am I supposed to go, son? Frank grinned, handing over a crumpled tip bill. Thanks. After the old man left, Evan sat down on a chair, wiping his sweat. The conversation had gotten to him. He thought about Lindsay again. Maybe he was worrying for nothing. Anything could happen, a few days would pass, and everything would be fine. That evening, when he returned home, he found the house empty. Lindsay was not there yet. A memory came to him. Yoga with Caitlin. He glanced at his watch. About 7. She would probably be back soon. Evan changed into his home clothes, warmed up the remains of yesterday's soup. He ate alone, in front of the switched-off TV, trying not to indulge in sad thoughts. To distract himself, he took his laptop and began to look through the news of the auto industry. New models, this had always fascinated him before. But today the lines did not linger in his head. It was past 9 when the knock on the front door finally came. Evan stood up to greet him. Lindsay walked in, wearing leggings and a sweatshirt, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. She was slightly sweaty and flushed, suggesting she'd been working out hard. Hello, he said, trying not to show his resentment at the long wait. Hi, she smiled tiredly, taking off her sneakers. Sorry it's so late. We stopped in for a smoothie after yoga and chatted. I see. You're probably hungry. I saved you some soup. Honestly, I'm so full of this smoothie that I don't want anything else. Lindsay waved her hand and headed straight for the shower. I'll go to bed quickly. Evan nodded, watching her go. Back to sleep. Again, she hadn't eaten dinner without him. He felt irritation rising somewhere in his chest, but he immediately shamed himself. She had the right to have some free time with her friend. He wasn't some kind of tyrant. And yet before, she always let him know if she was late, called, asked if he had eaten. That night, lying next to his wife, who had quickly fallen asleep, Evan couldn't close his eyes for a long time. Scenes from the past floated up in his head, how they had gone on vacation to Tennessee 2 years ago, how they had laughed, how they had kissed on every observation deck. Then they thought it would always be like this. Now it was as if there was a wall between them. He told himself that he would have a serious talk with Lindsay tomorrow if her aloofness continued. He couldn't keep things unsaid. But would he have the courage to ask her point blank, "Darling, what's going on?" Evan sighed in the darkness. As soon as he imagined her possible cold gaze, his insides sank. He was afraid to hear something that might hurt. Or maybe he was just winding himself up for nothing. Falling into a restless sleep, Evan decided to give himself and her a little more time. Maybe everything would work itself out, you just had to wait a little longer. On Wednesday afternoon, his third day after his promotion, Evan decided to give his wife a little treat. Work in the shop was going smoothly, the afternoon had passed quietly, and he was able to take a long lunch break. On his way downtown, Evan stopped at their favorite coffee shop on Main Street. They always made the perfect caramel latte that Lindsay loved. The barista, a girl named Kelly, smiled at him. "Hi, Evan. How are you?" "I'm fine, Kelly, thank you," he said, waiting for his order. "Is your caramel latte still as good?" "Even better," she winked. "Two big ones, like usual." "Yes, please." While Kelly made coffee, Evan wondered how happy Lindsay would be with the unexpected visit. They used to love giving each other little surprises like this. Why not revive the tradition? With two hot lattes and a small box of fresh croissants, Evan headed to the spa where his wife worked. The Paradise Spa was located on a quiet street not far from the center. Two potted palm trees grew in front of the entrance, and through the glass doors you could see a cozy lobby and reception desk. Evan walked in, and the pleasant aroma of essential oils hit his nose. There was a young girl sitting behind the counter, knew I hadn't seen her here before. She looked up. "Good afternoon, how can I help you?" "Hello. I'm looking for Lindsay Wheeler. She works here as a receptionist." Evan smiled, lifting the bag with treats. "I'm her husband. I wanted to surprise her." The girl behind the counter smiled shyly. "Oh, how sweet. Only you were probably just a little late. Lindsay went out for lunch about 10 minutes ago." Evan raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Really? It's strange. She usually has lunch later. We had almost no visitors this morning, so she decided to go out early to have a bite to eat." The girl shrugged. "She said she'd be back in an hour." "I see." Evan felt confused. He didn't know where Lindsay could have gone for lunch. She usually packed lunch or grabbed a bite to eat at the cafe around the corner. Without thinking, he asked, "Do you know if she went alone or with someone?" The girl hesitated. She came out with a client, I think. There was a regular client here for his morning treatments, and they got to talking. Maybe he invited her in for coffee." Evan's heart sank. "The client invited her?" She went. "The client. Do you know him?" he asked in as neutral a tone as possible. "I haven't seen him before," the employee replied, slightly embarrassed. "A man of about 40, tall, in an expensive suit. I think his name is Mark. He often comes to us for massages, and today he dropped in, and Lindsay was just getting ready for lunch." Evan felt his palms betraying sweat as he clutched the bag of croissants. He forced himself to nod calmly. "I see. Well, thank you. Then I think I'll leave her this." He held out the bag and latte on the counter. "Could you please tell her? Tell her Evan stopped by and that I love her." The girl nodded. "Of course, I will. Don't worry." Evan took a deep breath of the cool air as he stepped out of the car. An unpleasant feeling was growing in his chest, a mixture of anxiety and resentment. He glanced around the street automatically, as if hoping to see Lindsay somewhere. But the street was almost empty. A couple of tourists and a courier on a bicycle rushed past. Client Mark. The name was imprinted in her mind. Why had Lindsay never mentioned any Mark? Usually she talked about curious clients or funny incidents at work, and here she went out for coffee with him. Although maybe it was just a client's politeness, but inside it was still scratched. Back in the parking lot, Evan got into the truck and sat motionless for a few minutes. His hot coffee was still with him, the second cup he hadn't given away. He took a sip, The sweet, mouth-scalding latte was no longer enjoyable. Two voices were fighting in his head. One whispered venomously, "Something is fishy here. She's hiding something from you. A client, an expensive suit, isn't that a suitor?" The other voice immediately objected. "Stop it. This is paranoia. Lindsay was just being polite. She needs to maintain relationships with clients. Maybe she hopes he'll buy a membership or leave a generous tip." Evan sighed heavily, trying to calm himself. He decided he wouldn't jump to conclusions. He would talk to Lindsay that evening, calmly, without accusations. He would ask her how her day had been, who she had lunch with. She had nothing to hide, right? The rest of the day dragged on painfully slowly. Back in the garage, Evan worked hard, and not a half hour went by that he didn't think about his wife. Several times he picked up his phone to text her, but he didn't know what to text her. How was lunch would give away his anxiety too much. In the end, he didn't text her. Lindsay was late again at home that evening. There had been some kind of glitch in the booking system at the salon, and she had to stay late to sort it out. That's what she said on the phone when Evan called her around 6, worried about the silence. He offered to pick her up, but Lindsay refused, saying she had another 2 hours to do, no point in sitting around waiting. Evan walked around the yard, trying to calm his growing irritation. When his wife finally returned at almost 10, he met her at the door. Lindsay looked tired and agitated. "Finally," he said too sharply, "are you okay?" "Yes," she said dryly, walking past him into the house. "I'm terribly tired. The system crashed. I had to manually restore the schedule. The clients were nervous. The boss was on edge." Evan closed the door, feeling the tension rush into the house along with Lindsay. "Sounds terrible. Have you at least had dinner?" "I had a snack on the way, and I took a sandwich. I have no strength to eat at all." She threw her purse on the chair and reached up to massage her neck. "Listen, who is Mark?" Evan blurted out unexpectedly to himself, trying, however, to keep his voice calm. Lindsay turned around, frowning. "Mark, what are you talking about? I stopped by your salon today. I wanted to surprise you with coffee," Evan began, watching her face closely. "Your new coworker told me you were out to lunch with a client, Mark. I was curious who it was." Something like fear flashed in Lindsay's eyes, but she immediately frowned even more. "You came? Why, I wanted to please you," he answered quietly. "But I didn't find you." "Evan," she sighed, exasperated. "You shouldn't show up like that, unannounced." "At work it was," she paused. "Never mind. Mark's just a regular, yeah. He asked me out for coffee. I needed to discuss renewing my membership, so I went for a quick lunch. What's wrong with that?" Evan shrugged, trying to look nonchalant. "Nothing. I don't mind. I just thought it was strange that you didn't mention it." "Oh my God," Lindsay rubbed the bridge of her nose. "That's why she didn't mention it, because it was nothing special. She had coffee and came back. What difference does it make now?" There was a nervous note in her voice, as if his questions had angered her. Evan felt a stab of resentment. "The difference is that before we would tell each other about our day. Now you have so many, nothing special, things that I don't know about." "You're starting again," Lindsay said tiredly and headed for the bedroom. "I don't have the strength to argue now. I'm going to take a shower and go to bed." Evan stayed in the living room, hands at his sides to keep from throwing anything from the rage and pain that was building up. Just a few questions, and she was already exploding. Why? Was there really nothing to tell, or was there something to hide? Later that night, lying alone on the couch, Lindsay had apparently fallen asleep in the bedroom earlier, angry, without calling him. Evan stared at the ceiling for a long time. His thoughts were racing. His heart was telling him that his wife was incapable of betrayal, that he was screwing things up with his suspicions. But somewhere deep inside, a dark feeling was growing, and it was not giving him peace. In the stillness of the night, he allowed the terrifying thought to cross his mind for the first time. What if Lindsay was cheating on him? The thought made him shudder. No, he had to get that nasty thing out of his head. He had to, but he couldn't yet. On Saturday afternoon, Evan and Lindsay headed to Lindsay's parents' house for their traditional family dinner. Evan drove his truck down a familiar suburban street, trying to push aside the worries of the past few days. He hoped that the family time would help ease the tension between him and his wife. Lindsay was silent most of the way, staring out the window. She was wearing a light blue dress, her hair neatly done. She looked beautiful, but her gaze seemed distant. "Do your parents know I got a promotion?" Evan asked, unable to stand the silence, trying to make his voice sound cheerful. "I told my mom," Lindsay answered shortly, without turning around. "And what about her?" "She said, it's good." Lindsay shrugged. Evan sighed, feeling a familiar bitterness. He knew his parents-in-law had never been particularly interested in his career. Even before their marriage, they had doubts about whether the mechanic would be able to provide for their daughter properly. Then Lindsay had convinced them that he was a hard worker and a gold-handed person, and that he would be a success. But as the years passed, he did not become rich, and his relationship with his wife's parents remained frosty. The Lindsay family home was in a quiet, leafy neighborhood on a small river just outside of Louisville. A low-rise cottage with a manicured lawn, a flag by the porch, and blooming roses along the path, an almost idyllic picture. Evan parked the car and they got out. Lindsay headed for the door without even waiting for him. He grabbed a box of pie from the back of his truck, which he had bought on the way as a treat he couldn't cook, so bringing at least dessert was his rule. Lindsay's mother, Rita, a short woman with short blonde hair, opened the door. She wore a customary smile. "Oh, you've arrived. Hello, children." "Hi, Mom." Lindsay kissed her on the cheek and walked inside. Evan smiled at his mother-in-law. "Hello, Mrs. Carlyle." "Evan," she nodded slightly, taking the box from his hands. "What do we have here?" "Blueberry pie from the bakery on Ashland Avenue. You remember enjoying that," he said, trying to be pleasant. "Thank you, that's very sweet." Rita turned around and went into the kitchen without inviting him, but also not closing the door in front of him. He walked into the house, the familiar smell of cinnamon and old wood paneling hitting his nose. Voices were already coming from the living room. Lindsay's father, Henry Carlyle, was sitting in a chair reading a newspaper. He stood up when he saw his daughter. "Hello, Princess," he said warmly, hugging Lindsay. Then he nodded toward Evan. "Evan." "Hello, sir," Evan said, shuffling his feet a little. He always felt awkward around his father-in-law. Henry was a man of strict rules, a former soldier who had later owned a small boat business. Now retired, he spent his days fishing and reading the news. At the table, in addition to her parents, was Lindsay's younger sister, Courtney, and her fiancé. Courtney was chattering happily, telling her mother about her recent trip. Evan greeted them, and they exchanged polite, "How are you?" Everyone in the room seemed more animated talking to each other than to him. At dinner, when everyone was seated around the large oak table, the conversation flowed about various family news. Courtney bragged about her fiancé's new watch and honeymoon plans. Her parents asked her a lot of questions and gave her advice. Evan chewed his chicken in silence, wondering when he would get a chance to tell the story of his experience. Finally, taking advantage of a pause, he said, "By the way, I have good news too. I got promoted at work. I'm now a senior mechanic. I'm in charge of the shift." He tried to speak confidently, expecting at least formal congratulations. "Yes, yes," Lindsay mentioned it. The mother nodded, handing her husband a plate of salad. "It's good when you're appreciated at work." Her father merely muttered congratulations under his breath, already turning back to his plate. Courtney smiled. "Congratulations, Evan. That means more money to take home. Huh, Lindsay?" she joked. Lindsay didn't react, picking at her vegetables with her fork. Evan felt a twinge of embarrassment. The topic was dropped, and no one asked for details or was happy for him. The conversation turned to his parents' plans for renovating the kitchen. After a while, the father, wiping his mouth with a napkin, turned to Lindsay. "By the way, daughter, you can use the house by the river at any time. Mom and I haven't been there much this year. It was so hot in the summer, and now golden autumn is coming its high time." Rita picked up. "Yes, Lindsay, Go away sometime, have a rest. Take a friend or... She glanced at Evan, or your husband, of course, if he has time from work. Evan tensed, catching that note in her voice. If he has time sounded like a jab, but he smiled, trying not to show it. Thank you, I was just thinking that it would be nice to get out into nature. Oh, Evan, Henry chimed in, you're always in the garage. Can you at least leave your clients for the weekend? The question sounded either playful or taunting. I think I could if I planned ahead, he replied evenly. I'd be happy to go and fish with you, sir. Henry muttered something noncommittal and poured himself some more tea. He didn't seem excited about the idea of fishing together. We'll see. Lindsay suddenly interjected, pushing her plate away. Dad, Mom, thank you, of course, for the invitation. Maybe I'll really go there on the weekend, huh? I'll take a break from the city. She looked at Evan. You still often work on weekends, you're on duty there. Evan blinked in surprise. Well, I planned to have this day off free. We wanted to spend time together. Lindsay rolled her eyes slightly. You always decide at the last minute. I'm not promising anything. I just thought it wouldn't hurt to spend a couple of days in nature. There was an awkward pause. Courtney quickly changed the subject, talking about the upcoming Halloween holiday and costume ideas. Evan felt like a spare part at the table. His words were drowned out. His presence seemed unimportant. Lindsay sat distantly. Her parents talked to her and Courtney, and he was a shadow. Even the joy of the promotion was replaced by bitterness again. After dinner, Evan helped clear away the dishes, but Rita said, Leave it, we'll do it ourselves. You and Lindsay should spend the evening going for a walk. It sounded almost like a polite, you may go. Evan nodded and went to get dressed. On the porch, Henry suddenly clapped Evan on the shoulder. Listen, he began, lowering his voice. I may be old-fashioned, but I'll tell you straight, keep an eye on Lindsay. She's a pretty girl. There's a lot of people hanging around her. You, be a man. Evan was taken aback. Excuse me, sir. Henry removed his hand and grinned at the corner of his mouth. Nothing, just advice. Take care of your family. Without waiting for an answer, his father turned and went back inside, closing the door behind him. Evan stood on the porch, feeling his fingertips go cold. What was that? A hint? A warning? Or just general advice to value his wife? Lindsay was already in the truck, looking at her phone. Evan walked down the steps, got behind the wheel, and slowly pulled the car out of the yard. Night had fallen over the neighborhood, the streetlights casting a sparse glow on the road. They drove in silence for about 10 minutes until Evan, gathering his courage, broke the silence. Your father told me something strange before he left. Yes, Lindsay responded without looking up from the screen. He told me to keep an eye on you, and that there are a lot of people hanging around you. He tried to speak evenly, although his heart was pounding. Lindsay snorted unexpectedly. I bet you've used that favorite saying of yours about, be a man again. Well, something like that. Evan glanced at her. What do you think he meant? The wife shrugged. Oh, you never know. Dad thinks that all men should be jealous of their wives, otherwise they will leave. He has such an old, primitive worldview. Don't worry about it. Evan tried to accept this explanation, but it left a bad taste in his mouth. He said nothing, and they spent the rest of the ride in silence. Later, at home, they went to bed again in different corners of the bed. Evan lay listening to Lindsay's measured breathing. It seemed that even his parents sensed some kind of threat to their marriage. Or was he just imagining it? Henry's advice sounded ambiguous. But be that as it may, Evan was determined to figure it out. Not today, he was mortally tired. But soon, because of this uncertainty, this wall between him and his wife was becoming unbearable. The following week, the tension between Evan and Lindsay became almost palpable. They spoke little, mostly exchanging routine phrases about everyday life. Lindsay spent most of her time outside the house, sometimes staying late at the salon, sometimes citing meetings with friends or business with her mother. Evan threw himself into work just to avoid going crazy from tormenting suspicions. On Thursday night, over a dinner of reheated pizza, Lindsay suddenly announced. I still decided to go to the house by the river tomorrow. For the weekend. She said this almost casually, looking down at her plate. Evan put down his slice of pizza, not immediately finding what to say. Alone? Or with someone? He asked, trying to speak calmly. With Caitlin, Lindsay answered after a pause. You don't know her. She's a friend from college. We've been wanting to get out and talk for a while now. He nodded slowly. I see. You didn't see each other often before. You hardly mentioned her. Lindsay shrugged. Well, sometimes friendships are renewed. She recently got divorced. She was stressed, so I suggested we take a break. I remembered the house by the river. Evan felt his heart clench. His wife spoke so confidently, but he didn't trust her words anymore. However, he decided not to make a scene out of nothing. What if two friends really did go? Okay, he said quietly. You've earned some rest. Lindsay looked at him appraisingly. You don't mind? Why should I be against it? He tried to smile. Sure, go ahead. I'll just worry. The connection there is unstable. We'll take an external battery for the phone. Everything will be fine, she quickly answered. That night, as he was going to bed, Evan asked, What time should I let you go tomorrow? Are you in your car? Yeah, mine, Lindsay replied, scrolling through her phone. Caitlin's coming to my office at 5, and we'll go straight from there. I see. Does work know that you have a day off on Saturday? I made a deal. Everything is fine, she snapped. Evan fell silent. After a minute, he said quietly, Lindsay, I hope you have a good time. His wife just nodded, not taking her eyes off the screen. Evan turned away, feeling like a ghost in his own bedroom. On Friday after work, he came home to an empty house. Lindsay had left a note in the kitchen. Left around 5. Be back Sunday night. Don't worry. L. Evan held the note in his hands, trying not to shake. It was only a few lines, but it was chilling. He tried to keep himself busy. He threw the laundry in the wash, cleaned the garage, even tried watching a football match on TV. Nothing distracted him. His thoughts were there, far away by the river, where Lindsay supposedly spent time with a friend. On Saturday morning, Evan woke up before the sun had risen. The house was quiet and empty. He realized that he couldn't just sit around doing nothing. He got ready and went to work, even though it was a day off. In the workshop, he met a surprised Jake. Hey, what are you doing here? Asked a friend, wiping the hood of the car. It's a day off. Evan shrugged. There's nothing to do at home. I decided to finish the project. Remember that old motor? He had actually been meaning to rebuild the engine of the decommissioned motorcycle that was sitting in the corner of the garage for a long time. Now it was his salvation. Are you okay? Jake narrowed his eyes, noticing his friend's gloomy look. Evan tried to laugh it off. I just had a lot of everyday stuff piling up. I decided to clear my head with nuts and bolts. Jake nodded understandingly. You know, beer after work also helps to clear the air. Let's do it in the evening. Evan took a moment to imagine himself returning to an empty house and nodded. Sounds good. He spent the entire day fiddling with the engine, trying to drown out his thoughts. But you can't run away from yourself. Every hour he glanced at his phone, waiting for a message from his wife. But Lindsay didn't write or call. At lunchtime, he couldn't resist sending a message. How are you? Everything okay? The answer came only after 2 agonizing hours. Everything is okay. Enjoying nature. Bad connection. No, I miss you, or I love you, nothing personal. Just a report. Late in the evening, Evan and Jake went into a small bar near the workshop. Under the dim light of neon signs, 2 men drank cold beer from bottles. Country music was playing loudly, and the air smelled of fried wings. So what's on your mind? Jake asked bluntly, taking a sip. Evan turned the bottle over in his hands, examining the condensation. I don't know. Lindsay and I have kind of grown apart. She went away for the weekend, and He trailed off, unsure how much to share. Left? Where to? Jake raised an eyebrow. To my parents' house by the river to relax. Evan forced a smile. With a friend. I see. Jake said doubtfully. Does she often travel alone like this? Not before, Evan sighed. In fact, everything used to be different. Listen, Jake. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to the sound of the music. Have you ever been cheated on? The friend frowned, placing the bottle on the bar. Why do you think so? Evan rubbed his face with his hands. I don't know. I'm probably going crazy. I just feel like something's wrong. She's become secretive, cold. She's always somewhere, avoiding me. Today, I caught myself thinking, what if she didn't go with her friend? Jake shook his head. Evan, brother, I don't know. I hope not. But you've definitely got a serious conversation coming up. Did you ask her directly? I can't, he whispered. I'm afraid to hear. I understand. Jake put his hand on his shoulder. But this can't go on. It's better to know the truth than to torture yourself. Evan nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He quickly finished his beer, trying to hide the emotions that were flooding his body. On Sunday, he woke up with a heavy head, the effect of a few extra bottles. As the evening wore on, when Lindsay was expected back, Evan grew increasingly nervous. He cooked dinner, fried chicken with vegetables, one of the few dishes he could make. He wanted to do something nice to somehow improve the atmosphere. But it was already dark and Lindsay was still missing. She hadn't responded to his messages. Around 9 o'clock, Evan heard the sound of a car pulling up. His heart jumped into his throat. He looked out and saw Lindsay getting out of her sedan, grabbing a duffel bag. Evan ran out onto the porch to greet her. Hi, she said tiredly, passing him and entering the house. Evan noticed that she was wearing a different sweater than she had left, and that she looked quite content and rested, despite her words about being tired. Her cheeks were pink, her eyes were shining like someone who had had a great time. How was the trip? He asked, following her. Okay, Lindsay answered briefly, putting her bag down at the entrance. I'm tired from the journey. I want to take a shower. Maybe we can have dinner first. I made chicken, your favorite, Evan suggested hopefully. She just glanced at the laid table. Thank you, but I'm not hungry. We ate on the way. Evan felt his hands drop from this phrase. He tried so hard, waited. Lindsay had already disappeared into the bathroom. He sank into a chair, staring at the cooling vegetables. A volcano of resentment and pain was brewing inside. When Lindsay came out, he was determined to talk. However, when he saw her fresh from the shower, in a robe, with a satisfied face, the words stuck. She said, I'm exhausted. I'll go to bed. Thank you for your concern. And she disappeared into the bedroom without even kissing him. Evan cleared the table, feeling something die inside him. His trust, his hope, everything was crumbling. He glanced into the bedroom. Lindsay was lying with her back to the door, the light off. Perhaps she was asleep or pretending to be asleep. That night, he settled back on the couch. He lay in the dark, breathing in the lonely air. His thoughts alternated between rage, how could she do this to me? And self-deprecation, what did I do to deserve such estrangement? Am I a bad husband? He came to nothing except one determination. If the truth didn't come out, he would seek it out. He couldn't live in ignorance any longer. Whatever Lindsay was hiding, he had to find out. Monday was gloomy and rainy. Evan woke up exhausted. He had barely slept the night before. Lindsay, it seemed, was too. She tossed and turned in the bedroom, and in the early morning she was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, looking out the window. Evan approached her, hoping to start a conversation. Good morning. Aha, was all she responded, continuing to look at the gray sky. He sat down opposite her, trying to catch her eye. Listen, Lindsay, are we okay? He finally asked quietly. She frowned. Why such a question all of a sudden? Evan clasped his hands. It's just, we hardly talk. I feel like you're drifting away. You're being paranoid, Lindsay said sharply. I didn't get enough sleep, that's all. He sighed, gathering his courage. If something is bothering you or not to your liking, maybe we can discuss it. I'm ready. Evan, please, not now, she interrupted, getting up from the table. I have to go to work soon. I'll be late. She poured her unfinished coffee into the sink and headed to the bedroom to get dressed. Evan remained seated, staring at the dark sediment at the bottom of her mug. The attempt had failed. Lindsay had erected walls that could not be penetrated. On the way to work, he couldn't resist and called her. "Sorry about this morning. I didn't mean to irritate you. I'm just worried." "Everything's fine," she answered dryly. "I have to go now. We'll talk in the evening." However, they didn't manage to talk in the evening. Lindsay was late at work again. Evan had dinner alone, listening to the ticking of the clock and the sound of rain outside the window. Around 10 she returned, said only, "Tired, go to bed," and locked herself in the bathroom. Evan felt he couldn't go on like this. He stepped out into the drizzle, needing to cool down, pull himself together. Walking across the yard, he noticed Lindsay's car parked there. Her silver sedan was covered in wet dew. Something on the windshield glinted in the beam of a street lamp. A parking ticket. Evan walked closer and saw a small piece of paper behind the glass, a parking receipt. He pulled it out. "Riverfront Plaza parking, Saturday 7:20 p.m. to 11:45 p.m., $12 fee." His heart sank. Riverfront Plaza is a shopping and entertainment center in the town of Milford, not far from the country house. It turns out that on Saturday night Lindsay was not in the house by the river, but in the parking lot of the complex, where there are restaurants and a movie theater. His hands began to shake. Evan walked around the car and peered inside, hoping to find something else. The interior was clean, but he noticed someone else's umbrella on the back seat, a man's, black, clearly not theirs. He took it out, his heart pounding. Maybe his friend had borrowed it, or maybe this umbrella belonged to that very client Mark. Evan caught himself thinking that his mind was already painting scenes for him. Lindsay and Mark leaving a restaurant in the rain, he opening an umbrella over her. His chest was constricted with pain. He returned to the house, soaking wet, but he didn't notice it. Lindsay had already gone to bed. The light in the bedroom was out. Evan quietly entered, turned on the bedside lamp. His wife narrowed her eyes. "Why light?" He was holding a receipt and an umbrella in his hands. "I found this in your car. What is it?" Lindsay sat up, looked first at the paper, then at the umbrella. "It looks like a parking ticket," she said, yawning. "And Caitlin's umbrella. I must have forgotten." Evan felt a flash of anger. "Parking in Milford, almost until midnight. You said you were in the cabin the whole time." Lindsay suddenly woke up fully and narrowed her eyes. "Have you been rummaging through my car?" "I saw it by chance." "Explain why you went to Milford." She snorted. "We just decided to go out for a civilized dinner, that's all. What's criminal about that? And you didn't think it necessary to mention it." "I forgot," she said irritably. "Oh my God, Evan, are you making a scene over parking?" He raised his voice, desperation breaking through. "Because you're lying to me. At first you said that we just sat in the house all Saturday, but now it turns out that we went out to have fun. Well, yes, we did. I don't have to report on every step," she flared up. "And yes, I lied so you wouldn't get worked up. I knew you'd be jealous even of going to a restaurant." Evan shook his head. "Jealous of a restaurant? That's absurd. But now I'm jealous of the person you went there with." Lindsay threw off the blanket and got out of bed. "With a friend, like I said. Stop interrogating me." "Then why are you hiding the details? Why secretly?" "Because you're becoming paranoid yourself," she shouted back. "You see lies everywhere." Her face turned red with anger. Her breathing quickened. Evan paused, looking at her. For the first time, he saw not coldness in his wife's eyes, but fury. But this fury was not caused by his fabrications, but by her own lies in which she was caught. "If you don't trust me, you could have said so right away," Lindsay said venomously, grabbing a pillow from the bed. "Then I'll sleep on the couch so as not to disturb you with my person, since I'm so suspicious." Evan stood there, stunned. He still clutched the crumpled receipt in his hand. The arguments were stuck in his throat. He wanted to scream, to throw out all the accusations that had accumulated, but he couldn't. All he heard was the slam of the living room door. Lindsay had gone there to spend the night, leaving him alone in their bedroom. He sat down on the edge of the bed. The umbrella was lying on the floor. Water from it had pooled on the carpet. The rain outside pounded the windowsill. Evan's heart was beating like he'd run a marathon. His ears were ringing. There was almost no doubt now. Lindsay had lied, concealed. Caught, she hadn't even tried to calm down or justify herself properly. She had only been angry that she had been caught. Everything pointed to the worst. That night I did not even sleep. He heard his wife tossing and turning on the couch behind the wall, coughing either from excitement or from the cold without a blanket. He did not let her take one with her. He wanted to either go out to her or kick her out completely, but he lay there frozen. By morning, all that was left was a heaviness in his soul. As soon as it was light, Evan left the house without waiting for Lindsay to wake up and drove to work, feeling as if he was on autopilot. The question loomed ahead: what to do next? He couldn't just watch his marriage crumble in a fog of lies. He needed the truth, no matter how bitter it was. In the morning, Lindsay was packing. Evan stood in the bedroom doorway, watching her silently pack her clothes and toiletries into a bag. His heart ached. Yesterday she was sleeping next to him, and today she was leaving, as if putting an end to it. "Are you staying with your parents for long?" he asked hoarsely. Lindsay zipped up her bag without looking up. "I don't know. Until we figure out what's going on between us." "What's going on?" he asked, clenching his fists. "Can you explain?" She looked at him tiredly. "What's happening is that I'm tired of suspicions and scandals. I need to think. You, apparently, too. So you're just leaving, like this?" The voice broke into a bitter smile. "I'm not saying forever. I'm saying I need space," Lindsay snapped. "It'll be better than endless arguments." Evan stepped forward, holding out his hand. "Lindsay, please. Let's not do this. I love you. If I'm doing something wrong, tell me, I'll fix it." She turned away. He did not see her face. "It's not just you," she said quietly. "It's complicated. I'm confused." "Confused?" he echoed. "In what? In our relationship?" Lindsay was silent, then picked up her bag. "I have to go. Mom is waiting." She paused for a moment at the door. "Evan, take a break too. Think about what you want." He chuckled bitterly. "I know what I want. I want everything to be like before. For you to be happy next to me." Lindsay pressed her lips together, looking down. "I'm sorry," was all she managed to squeeze out as she opened the door. Evan followed suit. "Forgive me for what? For what I did, or for what you're going to do?" She turned around abruptly. "For nothing in particular. It's a shame it turned out this way." And before he could answer, she slipped out the door. The door slammed shut. Evan stood frozen in the middle of the living room. A draft stirred the curtain. The house was completely empty. He rushed to the window. Lindsay had loaded her bag into the car, got in, and, without raising her eyes toward the house, drove off. The taillights disappeared around the bend in the street. Panic rose in his chest. "She's gone. Gone," pounded in his temples. Evan rushed around the house, unable to find a place for himself. He tried to call her, no answer. He wrote a message. "Forgive me. I love you. Let's talk about it." He looked at the screen, waiting, but there was no answer. An hour later, he couldn't stand it any longer and dialed the Carlisle home. Rita picked up the phone. "Hello? Hello, it's Evan," he croaked. "Is Lindsay there?" "Yes, she has arrived," the mother-in-law answered evenly. "She needs to rest. I think it was right that you decided to be apart." Evan closed his eyes. So his parents knew and apparently approved. "Rita, you know we have problems," he squeezed out. "I don't want to lose her." "Evan," the woman's voice remained cold, "maybe you both really need to cool off. Give Lindsay some time." "And you didn't notice anything strange?" suddenly escaped from his lips. "In her behavior, maybe she has. Someone." There was silence on the other end. Then Rita said through gritted teeth, "It is inappropriate to ask me such questions. This is your business with her." "Then you don't know," Evan said bitterly. "I know that my daughter is unhappy." The the mother-in-law said crisply, "And you know better why." Then she softened her tone. "Evan, I'm sorry you're both suffering so much, but Lindsay doesn't want to talk to anyone right now. Let's respect her wishes." Evan felt tears welling up. "Got it. Thank you. Bye," Rita said briefly and hung up. He sank into a chair. Lindsay's mother's words burned. "Your daughter is unhappy. You know better." So it was his fault. He couldn't make her happy. Moments came to mind when he stayed late at work, forgot about her requests. Maybe he really had missed something. All day, Evan wandered around the house like a ghost. The silence was oppressive. Everything reminded him of Lindsay, her cup on the shelf, her blanket on the couch, her bottle of perfume on the dresser. Thoughts crept into his head. What if she never came back? What if it was over between them? Jake arrived in the evening. Evan automatically called him on the phone, not remembering how. A friend brought pizza and a couple of bottles of cola. "Hang in there, buddy," he said, seeing Evan's state. "Maybe all is not lost." They ate straight from the box, and Jake tried to cheer them up with jokes, but it didn't work very well. Evan barely responded. "Are you planning on doing anything?" Jake finally asked, wiping his fingers with a napkin. Evan looked up at him with red eyes. "In terms of, well, sitting and waiting is not an option. If she really, well, with someone, we have to either fight or," he did not finish. "Or let go," Evan whispered. The word stung, but he knew he wasn't ready to let go. Not without a fight. "I have to know the truth, Jake," he said firmly. "I'm not moving until I know for sure." "And how can we find out?" His friend sympathetically squeezed his shoulder. Evan looked at his phone thoughtfully. "There is one way. Follow. Catch them." "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Jake frowned. "Do I have a choice?" Evan smiled bitterly. "She won't admit it, so I'll find out for myself." Jake nodded. "If anything, I'm with you." But Evan shook his head. "Thanks, but I'll do it myself. It's between me and her." He took a sip of cola, trying to stop his hands from shaking. The thought of being followed, of seeing everything with his own eyes, was both terrifying and resolute. "What are you going to do?" Jake asked quietly. Evan stared at one point for a long time, then answered. "She's with her parents now. Let her be. But if she really is with someone, they'll probably meet. I'll figure out when and where, and I'll be there." The friend sighed. "Take care of yourself, okay?" Evan smiled weakly. "We'll try." It was late at night when Jake left. Evan sat in the dark, planning. He thought about the parking ticket, the time. Maybe Lindsay met him on weekends, or in the evenings when she worked late. He needed to check her routes. He opened his laptop and logged into their cell phone account. He had never spied on his wife before, but now the lines were blurred. Looking through the call details, he noticed a repeating number that Lindsay had been calling or texting regularly in recent weeks. The number was unfamiliar, and the interactions were mostly during the day or late at night. Evan wrote down the number. His hands were shaking. Maybe this was him, the lover. What next? Call? What to say? No, better to leave it as a key, in case he ever needed proof. In those hours, Evan seemed to burn out from the inside. The pain transformed into a cold determination. He would no longer blindly believe and wait. He would act. Even if the truth destroyed him completely, he had to know it. Before dawn, exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep right on the couch. In his dream, he saw himself running along the endless riverbank, and Lindsay was laughing ahead, slipping further and further away. He tried to catch up, shouting her name, but his voice was drowned out by the noise of the wind. Evan woke up alone, with a deep melancholy in his heart, but he was determined. Soon this race would end. Soon he would find out who he had been running for all this time, his wife, or just a ghost of their past happiness. Lindsay hadn't been home for 2 days. She'd only responded briefly to a couple of texts from Evan. "I'm fine. Rest up too." No sign of regret or willingness to talk. Evan, exhausted by the uncertainty, decided to wait no longer. On Wednesday night, he parked near the Carlisle house, hiding in the darkness of his neighbor's yard. At first, he felt ashamed of his own actions, hiding, spying on his wife. But he clenched his jaw and reminded himself, this is for the truth. Around 7 p.m., Lindsay left her parents' house. Evan crouched behind the wheel. She got into her car and pulled away. He started the truck at a minimum of noise and followed carefully, keeping his distance. Lindsay drove confidently, turned onto the highway towards the city. Could it be home? A hope flashed, but she drove past the necessary turn. Then where to? 20 minutes later, she pulled into the business district, parked at the cafe Baker's Brew. Evan stopped to the side, watching. Lindsay left and went into the cafe. Evan's heart was pounding. A faint thought was simmering inside. What if she really was just meeting a friend, maybe the same Caitlin? But a few minutes later, he saw a man approach the cafe, tall, dark-haired, in a leather jacket. Evan tensed. Even from a distance, it dawned on him that this was the same client Mark from the spa, whom the administrator had described to him. Mark walked into the cafe. Evan waited, afraid to blink. About half an hour passed. Finally, the doors swung open, and Lindsay and the man appeared. They stood at the threshold of the cafe, facing each other. Lindsay was laughing at something. Mark held her hand in his. Then he gently touched her chin with his fingers and leaned down, kissing her lips lightly. Evan felt like he was being electrocuted. He gripped the steering wheel, his eyes wide. That was it. No more doubts. His wife was kissing someone else. He unconsciously pressed the horn harder, but then caught himself and removed his hand. The short signal, fortunately, was drowned out by the noise of the street. Lindsay and Mark did not notice anything. They went to Mark's car, parked nearby, and got in. A moment later, the white sedan moved off. Evan perked up. He couldn't lose them. He started the truck and followed carefully. The red headlights of Mark's car were barely visible ahead. He kept his distance, trying not to lose them in the traffic. The car turned onto the highway leading to the outskirts of the city. Where were they going? Evan's heart was pounding in his ears. He felt both a freezing pain and a strange composure, as if he were watching a movie about someone else's life. 20 minutes later, the chase brought him to a small, cozy motel near a lake just outside Louisville. Evan parked in the distance, in the shade of trees. Mark and Lindsay got out of the car. He put his arm around her waist, and together they walked to the entrance. The sign above the door read Lakeview Inn. There was no one around, only a dim street light illuminating the gravel driveway. Evan watched them disappear inside. He sat there, clutching the steering wheel, feeling himself shaking. He wanted to jump out, to rush in after him, to grab this Mark by the lapels. But what next? A fight? A scandal? And what would it change? Lindsay was already with him anyway. He dropped his forehead to the steering wheel. Hot tears gushed from his eyes, mixing with the low growl that was tearing itself from his chest. For several minutes, Evan simply let out the pent-up pain alone in the dark, where no one could see his grief. There was an inner voice in my head. It's over. She betrayed you. But another voice whispered, pull yourself together. It's not over yet. You have to talk to her, tell her everything. About 30 minutes later, the motel door opened. Evan wiped his face with his sleeve and looked up. Mark and Lindsay were walking out, holding hands. He gently brushed a strand of hair out of her face. She looked happy and relaxed, a feeling Evan hadn't seen in a long time. His heart pierced again, knowing that this happiness wasn't his. The couple headed to their cars. Evan ducked to avoid giving himself away. He decided, now is not the time. He will not make a scene in the motel parking lot. It is too low. No, he will do it differently. Mark kissed Lindsay goodbye, got into his sedan, and drove away first. Lindsay stood there for a few minutes, as if coming to her senses, then headed to her car as well. As she drove away, Evan followed at a safe distance. He already knew the truth, but somehow he had to continue. Maybe part of him still hoped that she would go to her parents, as if the whole thing could be chalked up to a delusion. But no, Lindsay actually drove back to the Carlisle house, parked, and disappeared inside. Evan sat across the street, choked with rage, but also filled with a frightening emptiness. He waited until the lights went out in the house, making sure Lindsay had stayed there for the night. Only then did he drive slowly home. He spent the night without sleep. Over and over again, the scene at the cafe, their kiss, their embrace at the motel, came before his eyes. Every detail was seared into his memory. In a way, Evan felt relieved the worst was confirmed, the uncertainty dispelled. But instead of uncertainty, there was now another emptiness. What should he do with this truth? Towards morning, he made a decision. First, meet Lindsay face to face without surveillance. Say that he knows everything. Hear her explanations if they can change anything at all. And after that, say goodbye or fight, it will become clear. By Thursday afternoon, Lindsay herself called him out of the blue. Evan jumped when he saw her name on the screen. Hello, his voice became hoarse. Evan. My wife's voice sounded tired. I need to stop by the house today, pick up some more things. Will you be home? He squeezed the phone. There it was. She wasn't even trying to make peace. She was just busily breaking bridges. I will, he answered firmly. Come, we need to talk. There was a pause on the line. I don't think that's a good idea, she said quietly. I insist, Lindsay. Be honest with me for once. She exhaled. Okay, I'll be there in an hour. Evan hung up, his heart pounding again. This was the conversation he both craved and dreaded. He looked around the house, the battlefield that would be their last as a family. A determination welled up in his chest. No more games. He would tell them everything and demand the truth. Lindsay arrived exactly an hour later. Evan was waiting for her in the living room, pacing in circles, sitting up and then jumping up again. He was seething inside, pain, anger, despair. He braced himself for any words, but he didn't know how to keep from breaking down. There was a sound of the door opening. Lindsay walked in, stopping at the threshold. She looked pale, with shadows under her eyes. Before Evan could say a word, she said quietly, I won't be staying long, just to pick up my things. He felt anger flare at her cold tone. Come in, he answered hoarsely. Lindsay walked inside, passing him as if he were a stranger. She put her bag on the floor and looked around. Where are my green shoes? She asked in a colorless voice, obviously trying to get the job done as quickly as possible. Evan couldn't resist. Seriously? Are you talking about this now? She met his gaze. Evan, let's not drag this out. It's hard for me to be here. He smiled bitterly. Hard? Of course. So many memories. Probably at least a little conscience, right? Lindsay winced. Don't start. Where should I start, Lindsay? He stepped closer, his voice shaking. You've already finished everything for both of us. Maybe you could at least tell me the truth to my face. Do I deserve this? She bit her lip and turned away. What is the truth? Evan raised his voice. That you have a lover, that you cheated on me for months. Don't you dare evade me now. Lindsay flushed and raised her voice too. Followed. You followed me. Yes, he blurted out. Hell yes. I saw you kissing him. I saw you walk into the motel together. His voice broke on that word. Lindsay turned pale, her mouth hanging open in shock. You followed me? Evan, how could you? That's unhealthy. He snorted at the absurdity of the situation. Unhealthy? You cheated on me, and you think it's unhealthy that I found out about it. Lindsay covered her face with her hands. God, say something, he cried, feeling his eyes fill with tears. At least admit it. She dropped her hands, tears glistening in her eyes too. Okay? Yes, Lindsay whispered. It's just like you saw it. Evan closed his eyes for a moment, even though he knew the answer. How much? How long ago? Lindsay sat down on the edge of the couch as if her strength had left her. Several months, since spring. Evan slammed his fist into the door frame, causing the leather to crack. Damn! Why? Lindsay, what's so bad about me? She sobbed. It's not about you. Or rather, not only about you. I got confused. I didn't have enough. Warmth. You were always at work. You came home tired. You had no time for me. Are you seriously blaming my overtime right now? Evan exploded. I worked hard for us. I know, she cried back, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I was still lonely. You were there, but you weren't there emotionally. We became like neighbors, Evan. And you decided to find solace in the arms of the first person you met? He hissed venomously. Lindsay shook her head. It wasn't like that. On purpose. It just happened. Mark, he came to the salon often. We talked. He listened to me, understood. I didn't even notice how attached I became. And slept with him, Evan said cruelly. She covered her face. I didn't want this to happen. I tried to stop. When, before or after the motels, brakes failed, his sarcasm was full of pain. Lindsay sobbed. I'm sorry. Evan felt something inside him crumble completely at her words. I'm sorry. Just forgive me, that's all. Do you love him? He squeezed out. Lindsay was silent. That silence said more than any words. Evan closed his eyes. It's clear. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by their ragged breathing. Lindsay was the first to break it, trying to speak evenly. It will probably be better for both of us. He smiled bitterly. Better? For you, maybe. But for me? How can it be better when my wife betrayed me? She looked at him pleadingly. Believe me, I didn't mean to hurt you. But she did, he snapped. Lindsay rubbed her temples. Understand, I tried to persuade myself for a long time to save everything I tried. But even then I understood that nothing would work out for us. Evan frowned. What are you talking about? About. She swallowed hard. That we are too different. That I fell out of love. The word pierced him like a knife. He shook his head. I never thought I'd hear this from you. I'm so sorry, Evan, she whispered sincerely. You're a good man. We just don't fit in together. Now it's clear, he nodded with a bitter smile. You have your own path with Mark. Lindsay closed her eyes. I'm sorry. Enough, he barked, and she flinched. Don't you dare ask for forgiveness again. It's an empty phrase now. He walked up to the door and opened it. Take your things and leave. Lindsay stood up, swaying. She picked up her bag and headed for the bedroom in silence. 10 minutes later, she emerged holding a bag of shoes and several hangers of clothes. Evan stood by the door, looking at the floor. There was a black hole in his chest. It seemed like he had cried out all the tears and shouted out all the anger. All that was left was emptiness. Lindsay stopped next to him. I'll come for the rest tomorrow when you're gone. It'll be better that way. He nodded dryly, not looking at her. She tried in a trembling voice. I really. Go, he interrupted in a muffled voice. Lindsay looked down and walked out the door. Evan slammed the door as soon as her footsteps had left and leaned his back against the tree. He looked around. A broken lamp he hadn't even noticed how he had swept it off the table in the heat of an argument, a pillow on the floor. The house was completely empty. It was all over. Evan sank slowly to the floor in the middle of the living room. He wanted to howl, but there was no sound, only a silent cry from his soul. He ran his hand along the carpet, his fingers clawing, trying to hold on to something in this new, alien world where Lindsay was no longer around. Minutes or hours, he didn't know, passed in this silence. Finally, he got up, picked up the shards of the lamp from the floor, and threw them away mechanically. He went into the bedroom. Half the closet was empty. The mirror on her dressing table was bare. Lindsay had taken her favorite perfume and cosmetics. Evan collapsed face down on the bed, their marital bed. He remembered the first night after their wedding, when they lay here, holding hands and making plans. It seemed like another life. He didn't notice how a long moan of pain escaped from his throat. There was no one to hear him or comfort him. In this darkness, he was now alone. And yet, at the very bottom of despair, a tiny spark smoldered. He was alive. He had withstood this blow. He could withstand the next one. Before dawn, Evan rose from his bed, still wide-eyed. The pain was still there, but it had turned into a strange clarity. He knew what he had to do next. Cut the past off completely and start over, no matter how scary it was. He walked over to the dresser where their wedding photo still stood young, happy, smiling stupidly. Evan picked up the frame, looked into the eyes of his former self, and said quietly, "Goodbye, Lindsay." Then he put the photograph away in a drawer, wiped his tear-stained eyes, and began a new day of his new, lonely life. A few days after the breakup, Evan decided to finally sort out everything that reminded him of the past. He packed up the rest of Lindsay's things in boxes, clothes, books, small items, and took them to her parents' house. Henry Carlyle met him in the courtyard with cold politeness. Without saying a word, he took the boxes and merely said, "Lindsay is not here now. She is resting in our house by the river. She needs to recover. I think you both need to cool off." Evan gritted his teeth, but nodded. "It's clear." The father-in-law paused and added, "You'd better get a good divorce right away. It will be more correct." "You're probably right," Evan replied dully. Getting into the truck after that conversation, he felt a fresh wave of bitterness. Lindsay had retreated to that country house, their dream family nest, but not with him, but with her lover. Images flashed through his mind, she and Mark, sitting on the porch, hugging, walking along the water. Evan slammed his fist on the steering wheel. His breathing was ragged, a chill ran down his spine. He drove a few miles along the highway, trying to calm down. "No," he finally decided firmly, "this is not how it will end." His chest filled with a painful determination. He had to see it with his own eyes and put an end to it himself. Evan turned the pickup around sharply and headed down the familiar dirt road that led to the river bank where the Carlyle family home was located. Lindsay was at the river house now, the one they'd once dreamed of spending weekends together. But she wasn't there with Evan now. He could see the familiar roof through the trees ahead and the reflection of the Ohio River. Mark's white sedan was parked in the driveway. Evan turned off the engine and got out of the car, his heart pounding in his chest. He walked quietly down the path to the slightly open front door. He could hear voices and the clatter of dishes inside. Without thinking, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. In the living room, Lindsay and Mark were sitting at a candlelit table, having dinner in a cozy atmosphere. When Lindsay saw Evan, she screamed and jumped up. "Evan?" Mark also stood up abruptly. "What are you doing here?" Evan felt a storm of emotions wash over him. He barely managed to contain his trembling. "Didn't expect to see me." Lindsay turned pale. "Evan, why did you come?" He glanced around at the romantic setting, 2 plates, wine, candles, and smiled wryly. "I came to see how you've settled in here, to admire, so to speak, someone else's happiness." Mark frowned and stepped forward, slightly shielding Lindsay. "Listen, you better leave. We're adults. We'll sort this out without a scene." Lindsay threw her hand on Mark's shoulder. "Mark, please." But Evan no longer controlled his voice, which broke. "Adults, you say? Is it an adult to sleep with someone else's wife behind his back?" Mark raised his hands in a conciliatory manner. "I understand, it hurts you. But feelings are such a thing, we didn't want to hurt you." These words only made even angrier. "We didn't mean to hurt anyone," was beyond cynical. "Shut up!" he shouted and rushed at Mark. A fight broke out between the men. Lindsay screamed. "Stop it!" Mark, being a little taller and stronger. "Cool down, Evan." "Lindsay, get away!" Mark shouted over his shoulder. "Don't you dare boss her around," Evan barked. Evan loomed over him, his fist clenched for another blow, but then Lindsay hung on his arm, bursting into tears. "Enough, please, enough, Evan." Her desperate cry brought him back to reality. Evan froze, breathing heavily. In front of him was the fear-distorted face of the woman he once loved. He lowered his hands. Lindsay stepped between them, blocking his path. "Please, go away," she sobbed, looking into Evan's eyes. "We'll all only get worse from these fights." Evan felt empty. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve and grinned through the pain. "What are you afraid of? That I'll kill you here? Don't worry. I've said and done everything." He took a step back. Lindsay tried to step towards him. "Evan." Mark carefully put his arm around her shoulders, but she shook his hand off, not taking her wet gaze off Evan. He spoke unexpectedly quietly, addressing only his wife. Do you know why I came? I wanted to make sure that everything between us was really over, that you were happy with him. His voice trembled, but he continued. Well then, I'm convinced. Lindsay covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Mark said quietly, if you need anything. Evan raised his hand, stopping him. I don't need anything else from you. He straightened up, feeling the last of his anger drain away, replaced by a tired bitterness. Live, he said with a bitter half-smile. I loved you, Lindsay, and now, goodbye. Lindsay dropped her hands, sobbing. I'm sorry. Evan just shook his head. Take care of her, Mark. Try to make her happy. He turned and walked out of the house, leaving them alone in the shattered shards of dinner and the silence. He reached the truck in the twilight and collapsed into the seat. The fight had left his body aching, but his heart felt strangely light. It was over. Evan started the engine and, without looking back, left the place where he had put a final point in this story. Ahead, over the darkening horizon, the moon slowly rose, illuminating the road home. Evan felt how, with each kilometer, his breathing became easier. He had broken free from the nightmare and was driving towards a new dawn of his life. Evan returned to Louisville in the dead of night. His shirt was torn, his fist swollen from the fight. He could feel every scrape, but his heart hurt worse. And yet, in the fog of pain, there was a strange clarity. He had done all he could. The only way forward was from here. He stopped at a 24-hour drugstore and bought a bandage and some painkillers. The pharmacist asked sympathetically if he needed a doctor's help, but Evan shook his head. He could handle it himself. And indeed, he could handle it himself now. The house was quiet. He carefully treated his cuts and bandaged his arm. On the kitchen table lay the papers from the lawyer, a divorce petition, ready for Lindsay to sign. Evan ran his fingers over it. A little more and their marriage would officially end. Strangely, this realization no longer caused panic or anger, only a quiet sadness. The next day, Evan didn't go to work. He called his boss and asked for a day off for family reasons. Mr. Rogers, who knew about the divorce, responded with understanding. Take a rest, son. If anything happens, we're nearby. These simple words of support suddenly touched Evan. Before, his boss treated him strictly on business, but now he treated him almost like a father. Staying home, Evan spent the first time in a long time just lounging. He sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the people passing by, the autumn leaves swirling in the air. His head was empty, and that was good. No nagging thoughts, just a tired calm. Jake stopped by later in the evening. Seeing his friend's bandaged fist and the bruise on his cheekbone, he whistled. Well, you're something. Did you finally go to see them? Evan nodded, taking a sip of cola. Yes, it was stupid, I know, but I couldn't do otherwise. Jake sat down next to her on the porch steps. And how is it? Evan thought about it and answered honestly. It hurts, but now, it's easier. I saw everything and let go. His friend slapped him on his healthy shoulder. I'm proud of you, buddy. You're stronger than you look. Evan chuckled. I'm not sure. He was acting crazy there. But now it's definitely a point, Jake sighed. What are you planning next? Evan shrugged. I'll complete the divorce. I won't quit my job. I'll live, somehow. Jake took the keys out of his pocket. Listen, let's go fishing tomorrow. Remember, you kept calling, but we never got around to it. Evan looked at his friend in surprise. He was not a fan of fishing rods. Jake smiled. What? Let's go to the river, sit quietly with our fishing rods, and drink some beer. Will that bother you? Evan felt a warm wave of gratitude. Jake just wanted to get him out of the house, distract him. Thank you, he said quietly. Let's try it. At dawn on Saturday, the two of them stood on the bank of a small pool outside of town, casting their rods. The fog hung over the water, the air was crisp. Evan took a deep breath, feeling his heart calm down. There were hardly any fish biting, but it didn't matter. Jake was diligently reeling in his line, and Evan watched the play of light on the water. His head was strangely quiet. He found himself not thinking about Lindsay for the first time in a long time. There's a bite, Jake suddenly yelled happily, pulling out a tiny bass. They both laughed, heartily, like old times. Evan slapped his friend on the back. "Well, now you're a seasoned fisherman," Jake smirked. "The main thing is that I made you laugh." Evan was pleasantly tired as he drove home toward noon. Jake dropped him off at his house and waved goodbye. "Hold on, Ev. Everything will be fine," he shouted as he walked. "Thank you," Evan replied, watching the car drive away, realizing how lucky he was to have his friend. There was a letter from the lawyer in the mailbox. Inside were copies of papers for Lindsay and a schedule for a court hearing in a month. Everything was going as usual. Evan made himself some tea and settled down on the sofa. The silence of the house used to drive him crazy, but now he finally perceived it as peace. Of course, sometimes it would roll over him. Here, he could hear something rustling, but no, Lindsay would not come out of the bedroom with a smile, would not ask him to help button her dress. These phantoms would still come, but less and less often with each passing day. He took a piece of paper from the table and began to write down the things he had been putting off. It was a strange thing to do, planning the future when it had seemed so recently that life no longer existed. But it did. The list was varied. Finish the Yamaha engine, the same one in the workshop, gathering dust for about 6 months. To visit my sister in Indiana, they rarely saw each other. Start saving up for my own workshop, a daring dream, but why not? As Evan wrote, he found himself looking forward instead of back for the first time in a long time. It was both terrifying and inspiring. After thinking, he added the last point: try to be happy again. It seemed trivial, but honest. 6 months after their breakup, a lot had changed in Evan's life. The divorce was official in early spring. He and Lindsay had exchanged only a few polite words in court. She thanked him for his understanding, probably for not making the process more difficult. Evan just nodded. He saw a mixture of guilt and relief in her eyes. He had felt the same way himself. The pain had finally given way to calm. After signing the papers, they went their separate ways outside the courthouse. No tears, no scenes, everything looked surprisingly ordinary. Already descending the steps, Evan suddenly stopped, took off his wedding ring, which he still wore out of habit, and twirled it in his fingers for a few seconds. Then he resolutely put it in his pocket. Goodbye, past life. Work became his lifeline and a source of new goals. Evan worked tirelessly, and Mr. Rogers appreciated it. In April, at a general meeting, the boss announced that he planned to open a second workshop on the other side of town and invited Evan to participate in the management. "You have a talent not only for mechanics, but also for management," Rogers said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Think about it. I'll help with the investment, and then it's up to you." Evan didn't immediately believe in himself, but his colleagues, especially Jake, praised his abilities, and he agreed to try. So he got an ambitious task to prepare the new workshop for opening by autumn. His personal life also began to take on color. In the evenings, Evan often went out of the house, either to play football with a teenage boy from the neighborhood. He grew up without a father, and Evan began taking him to the stadium to support the local team or to friendly get-togethers with colleagues. Sometimes he would happily stop by that very coffee shop on Main Street. Barrister Kelly would greet him with a cheerful, "Hi, long time no see." They would chat about trifles, and Evan would catch himself thinking that he was simply enjoying talking to a pretty girl about nothing important. One day, Kelly winked as she served him coffee. "You're especially glowing today. Any news?" He smiled. "Yes, life is getting better." And I was surprised at how honest it sounded. Yes, sometimes at night, he still had dreams about the past, about Lindsay. He woke up with heaviness, but he already knew what to do. At such moments, Evan sat down to disassemble the old Yamaha motorcycle, which he had finally started to restore. Fiddling with the hardware calmed him down, and by morning the bad thoughts retreated. One day in late May, Evan received a letter from Lindsay. A real paper letter in a postal envelope. His heart sank when he saw the familiar handwriting addressed to him. Inside were a few lines. "Evan, I don't know if I should write, but I want to ask for forgiveness once again. for all the pain I caused. I am grateful to you for the good things we had. I hope you can be happy. L. Evan stared at those words for a long time. Before, they would have stirred up a storm of emotions. Now, he felt only quiet sadness and compassion. He carefully folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and hid it in the drawer. He didn't answer, he didn't see the point. But in his mind, he forgave Lindsay at that moment completely. He let go not only of her, but of his own resentment. On the first weekend of summer, Evan went to Indiana to visit his older sister and nephews. He hadn't shared the details with his family for a long time, but now he was open about the divorce. His sister spent half the day scolding Lindsay with unflattering words, trying to feed her brother homemade pie, and then suddenly said, "I see you even look better. You've actually become younger." Evan laughed. "Come on, Kate, come on." Seriously, she ruffled his hair like she had when he was a child. "I can see you're feeling a lot better. I'm happy for you." And Evan realized that his sister was right. He really had changed for the better. Now, when he looked in the mirror, he saw not a hunted, tired man, but his former self, only older and a little wiser. Returning home after that family weekend, he caught himself humming his favorite song to the radio. His soul was light. Ahead of him were the chores with the new workshop, interesting projects, and just a warm summer, a time of new impressions. Late that evening, while clearing out his closet, Evan came across a forgotten frame with their wedding photo, which he had never taken out of the house. He looked at the smiling young him and Lindsay. There was no pain or anger anymore, only bright gratitude for the happiness they had once shared and for the lessons life had given him. "Thank you. And goodbye," Evan said quietly, putting the photo back in the box. At that moment, he finally understood. His heart is free. Free not for new pain, but for new feelings whenever they come. And for now, he has himself, his friends, his family, his favorite thing. This is enough to live on and smile at the new day. In the fall, exactly 1 year after that memorable promotion, Evan stood under the sign of the new auto repair shop, Wheeler and Rogers. Friends and colleagues were bustling around, preparing everything for a small opening. Balloons, a ribbon-cutting Jake insisted on tradition, even though Evan balked. "So, are you ready?" Mr. Rogers approached, holding out the scissors. Evan smiled and looked around at the crowd. Everyone who had helped him through the tough times and get to this day was there. Jake beamed, holding a tray of plastic champagne flutes. His sister Kate had driven up from Indiana with her kids, the nephews already covered in ice cream while frolicking in the entryway. Kelly, the barista from the coffee shop, had brought a pitcher of signature lattes for everyone and was laughing at Jake's jokes. Even old Frank had parked his Toyota across the street, not missing the chance to be the first to try out the new service. Evan felt a lump in his throat, but this time it was from joy. "Come on," Jake shouted. "Cut the ribbon, boss." Everyone clapped. Evan ceremoniously cut the red ribbon on the workshop door. Applause, laughter, slaps on the back. He suddenly felt a warmth swelling in his chest. Wasn't that happiness? Later, as guests wandered off to inspect the boxes and raise toasts, Evan went outside to catch his breath. Kelly approached him with 2 lattes. "Here, let's celebrate our way." She handed him a glass of aromatic coffee. "Thanks, Kelly. You were so helpful with the coffee," Evan smiled. She coquettishly adjusted her curl. "You're welcome. I'm even flattered by such requests." They clinked their glasses and took a sip. "You know," Kelly said thoughtfully, "I watched you when you came in earlier. Your eyes were sad then, and now they're glowing." Evan didn't know what to say right away. Kelly continued softly, "I'm happy for you. You're cool. It's interesting with you." Evan's cheeks flushed like a boy's. "Thank you. You're wonderful too," he blurted out. Kelly laughed cheerfully. "I hope you'll come by more often now without sadness." "Of course," he answered confidently, looking into her shining eyes. That evening, after the last of his friends had left, Evan closed the doors of the workshop and stood alone in the deserted parking lot. The sky was clear, strewn with stars. He raised his head and took a deep breath of the cool air. He remembered leaving the old garage a year ago, excited about his promotion and dreaming of a future with Lindsay. Life had decided otherwise. But despite everything, he felt like everything had worked out. He had found himself. The headlights of a passing car pulled Evan out of his reverie. He pulled out his phone. A new message appeared on the screen from his sister. Proud of you. You did it. Love you. Asterisk. He smiled and replied briefly, thank you. Love you. That night, Evan was in no hurry to get home. He got into his trusty green pickup and went for a drive around town. The streets of Louisville, familiar, greeted him with the lights of storefronts and street lamps. He stopped at the Ohio River embankment, where he liked to reflect on difficult days. He got out and leaned on the railing, looking at the quiet surface of the river under the moonlight. Well, Evan, he said quietly to himself, let's move on. The heart responded with calm confidence. There was an unknown future ahead, but Evan wasn't afraid of it anymore. He knew he could handle anything. After all, he had already been through the hell of betrayal and emerged stronger than he had been. He returned to the car, casting a last glance at the river. Someday, he might once again share sunsets and sunrises with someone special. But even if not, he knew for sure now, happiness was in his own hands. The main thing was not to let them down, to keep moving forward. Evan slammed the truck door and turned on the radio. A familiar, upbeat tune began to play, the same song he'd been humming earlier. He turned up the volume and drove home, whistling along to the beat. The night turned to dawn, and a new day greeted Evan Wheeler, strong, refreshed, and ready to live his life the way it deserved. Another year has passed. Evan has celebrated his 40th birthday in a new world for himself, a world he has built anew. It was a summer evening, and he was standing in the backyard of the small lake house he had recently purchased outside Louisville. The porch was filled with guests chatting cheerfully. Jake was grilling meat. His wife was busy with a salad. His sister Kate, who had arrived with her family, was chasing children who were trying to pick green apples from a low branch. Kelly, the barista, was chatting animatedly with Evan's neighbor, occasionally glancing at the birthday boy and smiling softly. Yes, it was a celebration in honor of Evan Wheeler's 40th birthday. But not only that, every toast at the table included to a new life, to success, to happiness. And Evan, accepting the congratulations, felt with every cell that everything said was the pure truth. He poured cool homemade wine his sister had brought it from Indiana into glasses and raised his friends, I want to say. The conversations died down, everyone turned to him. Evan glanced at the familiar faces so dear. His eyes became treacherously moist, but he was not ashamed of these tears. Thank you, he began quietly, for being with me in both the good times and the hardest times. I won't go into the past. He waved his hand, and Jake nodded understandingly. But I couldn't have done it without you. Sister Kate smiled at him, squeezing her nephew's hand. Kelly watched intently, her head slightly bowed. Evan continued, I'm meeting this day as a different person. A year ago, to be honest, I couldn't even dream that I would have all this. He gestured with his hand at the yard, the house, the table, my own business, my own home. Such wonderful people nearby. We're always here for you, Jake chimed in, and the guests applauded. Evan laughed. I know. I just want to drink with you. And to a new page in life bright and happy. Hooray, voices rang out, and the glasses touched with a soft clink. After taking a sip, Evan felt absolute peace settle over his soul. He set the glass down on the table and walked to the edge of the yard, where the gentle slope to the lake began. The water sparkled gold in the rays of the sunset. Kelly quietly approached him. What are you thinking about, birthday boy? Evan smiled. Well, just like that. I'm happy. Kelly stood next to him, looking out at the lake. It's beautiful today. Very, he agreed, turning his gaze to her face. She noticed and was slightly embarrassed, but did not look away. That warm silence reigned between them when words were not needed. Finally, Kelly asked in a barely audible voice, Are you happy, Evan? He thought for a second and answered firmly, Yes. And indeed, at that moment he had no doubt. The past no longer caused pain. He thought of Lindsay less and less often, except as a stage past and a valuable lesson in life. According to rumors, she and Mark had moved to another state. Evan sincerely wished to himself that she too would find her happiness. He had not held a grudge against her for a long time. There was no reason. "I'm glad you're happy," Kelly said, touching his palm with her fingertips. Evan intertwined his fingers with hers, a gesture that came easily to him, without any internal struggle or fear. "And I'm glad that you're with me today," he replied. Kelly chuckled softly. "I'll be there tomorrow too, if you want." Evan felt the warmth of her words like a ray of the setting sun. "Of course I will." From afar, Jake shouted, "Hey, lovebirds, come here, we're going to cut the cake." Evan and Kelly walked back to the others, holding hands. The candles on the large chocolate cake flickered merrily. The children crowded around, ready to help blow them out. "Make a wish, brother," Kate winked. Evan thought for a moment. A wish. What more could he ask of fate? Perhaps for all his loved ones to be healthy and close by, and maybe for his heart to continue to lead him on the right path. He nodded to himself, took a deep breath, and blew out all 40 candles in one fell swoop. The guests clapped and laughed as his nephew blurted out dramatically, "Wow, Uncle Evan, you're strong." "The strongest," Jake confirmed, hugging his friend with one arm and ruffling his nephew's hair with the other. Everyone laughed. Evan looked around at the happy faces, hugged Kelly, who was standing next to him, and thought that strength wasn't just about muscles. True strength was about being able to go through trials and not forget how to love life. That evening, as Evan was seeing his guests off, he lingered at the gate. The sky was darkening, the stars were coming out. Kelly, throwing his jacket over hers, stood next to him, pressed close. "Thank you," Evan said suddenly, looking into her eyes. "For what?" she asked in surprise. "Just for being there," he answered simply. She reached up and kissed him lightly, their first kiss under the night sky, soft and gentle. Evan's heart fluttered, but this time with joy. He hugged Kelly tighter, feeling the world around him share his joy. The night was warm, the stars were shining brightly. Ahead of Evan Wheeler was a long-awaited calm period of life without shocks and with favorable changes. And although life could still present surprises more than once, he knew that he could cope with everything. After all, peace and hope reigned in his soul now. And next to him were those for whom it was worth living further, loving and believing in the future. Evan looked up at the endless sky and silently thanked fate for everything. For the trials, for the support, for the new chance. Then, smiling, he led Kelly into the house to meet a new chapter of his now truly happy life. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.